For Joyce, writing Ulysses between 1914 and 1921, the sense that the story of post-Parnellite Ireland was unfinished must have seemed self-evident. In Ulysses, the events of the 16th of June 1904 get squeezed in between or carved out from events which occur both before and after it. It is not at all hard to find contemporary novels which engage, whether more or less explicitly, with the problem of a story which won't come to an end, a story whose effects spill out beyond the actors who are centrally involved in it. In a sense, this is the flip side of the generational conflict plot that I've been outlining. The young who rebel against the older generation are attempting to end one story and start another, their own story. But the ghostly revisitings from the past suggest that they cannot start another, and that this is not simply a matter of dealing with the past, exercising the ghosts, and therefore being able to move on like a kind of fictional truth and reconciliation commission. So many contemporary novels set in the recent past. I'm thinking of Colm Tóibín's Brooklyn and Nora Webster, Anne Enright's The Gathering and The Green Road, Kevin Barry's Beetlebone. So many of these novels are stories written out of a fluid mixing of personal memory and historical research. For that very reason, they are stories which stage the impact of past histories on the present, partly through the lingering of memory, but also in the dramatisation of an incomplete past, a past which won't go away. Perhaps one of the clearest examples is The Gathering, where Anne Enright's narrator excavates an unfinished past of sexual abuse, which, as she slowly gathers, is still playing itself out in her own life and the lives of her siblings. I'm thinking in particular here of the two separate scenes in which the narrator visits the institution or the home where her abused uncle had been incarcerated or contained. And through these visits, she slowly recalls a previous visit which occurred in her childhood, and whose meaning she cannot exactly recover. She can't exactly piece together. We're in a place between rewriting of a history and kind of sensing, intuiting a form of historical a past which hasn't happened to her, but which belongs to her. Irish literature, and especially the novel and drama, has always been ahead of the game in isolating, for example, hidden experiences of familial sexual abuse, or the collision between the state and the church in perpetuating institutional regimes. Think of Beckett's Not I, the work of Edna O'Brien, John McGahern. Again, I'm interested in the fact that it's not modernist work or realist work that does it right across the spectrum. Literature is kind of, yeah. In continuing that legacy, I wonder if contemporary literature doesn't also continue another one. I can't help noticing, for example, the number of monstrous or emotionally stunted mothers who crop up in contemporary Irish fiction. As I've mentioned, the dysfunctional Irish family has always been a figure for a dysfunctional society. Think of the family in Patrick Kavanagh's The Great Hunger, for example, when in fact the family is just the mother, the kind of monstrous church-state mother. That figure has always existed, but I think now we're completely overwhelmed by them. Even a novel as audacious and risk-taking as Eamon McBride's A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing recycles this character of the inadequate mother. Or the latest example is the mother in Emma O'Donoghue's absorbing novel The Wonder. Both the mothers in these novels are victims, but they are chiefly victimizers. And furthermore, their lack of empathy, their willingness to sacrifice their children, derives in both cases from their excessive Catholic religiosity. So again, we have this alliance between the mother and a church. Where have we seen that before? I do think Stephen's mother somehow is kind of ruling all mothers. The alliance between the mother and the church overrules the needs of the child. Now, I'm not sure how many of you will have had a chance to read Emma O'Donoghue's recent novel, The Wonder, and I apologise, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot. So if you don't want to know, you have to stick your fingers in your ears. The Wonder seems to me an example of a novel which wants to tell a story about generational haunting from the other end of the telescope. It's set in post-famine Ireland, in Parnellite, Ireland. I'll just briefly outline the plot. We meet a nurse who has been in the Crimea and is kind of unemployed, and she's taken a job in the Midlands to look after or watch a child. She doesn't know what the job is, and part of it, rather like the narrator in The Gathering, our central character is a detective. She has to uncover the story that is hidden, which is quite different from, well, yeah, now I won't make that point. So the thing that she discovers is a starving child. We're in post-famine Ireland, so that we've got all these kind of, she thinks, is it to do with the famine? Is it to do with a mistaken understanding of Catholicism, that she feels she mustn't eat because she will get someone out of purgatory? And we slowly realise that it's another tale of sexual abuse. Again, we've got a kind of alliance between church and mother. Both the priest and the mother know about the story of sexual abuse, but they are prepared to keep it secret, even though it looks as though it is going to destroy the child. I think there is something troubling about the recurrence of this figure of the bad mother who channels religious orthodoxies or uses them as a defence. In the various reports and commissions which have uncovered stories of institutional abuse in the mother and baby homes and Magdalene institutions in particular, the focus has been on cruelty to both mothers and children. But literature seems oddly stuck with the bad mother trope or the emotionally stunted mother. And we might contrast, for example, the portrayal of Irish motherhood in the film Philomena, which is very, very different, and I'm suggesting could be different because it's not working within the kind of formal generational conflict story that I'm suggesting is kind of holding back, in a way, what contemporary fiction might be able to do. Part of the problem might be that fiction works with patterns that are hard to shift. And here I'm obviously thinking partly of the generational conflict pattern. And just as an aside, I'm aware that generational conflict is a common trope. It doesn't only happen in Irish literature. But I do think it is the case that it is not nearly as prevalent in British or American literature, for example. From the 60s onwards, British literature was interested in telling stories about couples, not parental conflict. And that, I think, just hasn't happened in the same way in Irish literature. I want to spend a little time looking at one further example, which is also partly, I think, an exception, and it's Colm Tóibín's recent novel, Nora Webster. One of the interesting things about this novel is that it's a failed couple narrative as much as it is a failed parent one, even though in this case the couple fails because one side of the partnership dies. So we meet Nora Webster in the months following her widowhood and follow her over the next 3 years as Tóibín slowly unfolds the story through tracing her lonely and cut-off temperament. He offers the reader tiny moments of lack of communication, which another novelist might want to turn into either more dramatic crises or partially successful encounters, but Tobin just lets them be in all their failure. One of the difficulties in the novel is how to square the portrait we're given of an irascible, difficult, widowed Nora with the image we get of the wife she once was. Tobin implies that she's been able to escape from her difficult childhood. Not surprisingly, she had a bad relationship with her mother, into a marriage which gives her freedom. It's a portrait of 50s domesticity, which reads like a riposte to so many later accounts of it, in that Nora experiences domesticity as freedom, a welcome escape from boring work in the office, and a life at home under the thumb of her mother without enough money. Her marriage is represented as aspirations successfully met, even though her relationship with her children is strained at best and fraught at worst, because Nora, of course, is in her turn a bad mother. It's marriage, not being in a couple. It's marriage, being in a couple, rather than being a mother, which has sustained Nora through the last 20 or 30 years. In some ways, I feel the lack of fit between married Nora and widowed Nora is a bit like the lack of fit I found between Enniscorthy and Brooklyn Eilish in the novel Brooklyn. There's a gap in the history. Things don't quite add up, and the reader's task is to find the missing pieces. This is very different from what I was suggesting happens in Enright or O'Donoghue, where it's the narrator's task to find the missing pieces. One of the missing pieces in Nora's Webster is the music that Nora rediscovers when she has to make a new life without her husband. An individual expressivity which we slowly understand she suppressed during and possibly for her marriage. In order to make her marriage work, she had to become this other thing. At any rate, one thing Nora is a distracted and disengaged mother. This is made absolutely explicit early on in the novel, when she leaves the children alone and doesn't call once for 3 months, but she decides to spend her time with her dying husband. And it's confirmed at the end of the novel when she burns her husband's letters, leaving the children with nothing of their father. However, I think Tobin is knowing about this. The novel is a portrait of a widowed mother, but it is also a portrait or a biography of a town. Enniscorthy is a town on the cusp of modernity in the 1960s, and it is a town as a whole obsessed by marriages and families, by the social world of private liaisons. So I think he's very good on the golf club, the gossip about whether the person who is going to be Nora's new brother-in-law is a bank manager or just works in a bank. And this is contrasted with a kind of slightly more, with a more socially liberal Dublin, where the student life is occurring. And there's a second contrast. In the latter half of the novel, we're offered a series of scenes of the family watching television. Northern Ireland on the telly scenes. They begin with attacks on the civil rights marches, which appear on the 9 o'clock news, and they culminate in coverage of the televised debates about Bloody Sunday. First of all, the civil rights marches. It's the first time we get kind of history coming into the novel via the telly. Is this a film? Connor asked. No, it's the news. It's Derry. The camera showed 2 or 3 of the marchers who had fallen to the ground, and then it followed some of the demonstrators who were running with the police in hot pursuit. The camera then focused on a woman who was screaming. After this description, the narrator's voice stays with Nora, who is expecting some kind of comment from the people watching the telly. And when none comes, she says to her brother-in-law, what do you think? And he said,